Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. I have got a banger for you today. I am joined by, she is the co-host of the Wildcard Rewind. She is the co-host of the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. She is one of my co-organisers of the UK FFC. She is one of the humblest content creators around. It is, of course, the fantastic Hannah Rowland. You will probably already know her as @HannRowland on Twitter. Hannah, how are you doing this fine evening?
Yeah, I'm doing brilliant. Thank you so much for having me on, Rich. I've been admiring what you and Tom have been doing ever since you set it up. So I'm super excited to join you on this video. Can't wait to get going.
No, absolutely delighted to have you on. As I said, one of the brightest minds, one of the humblest people out there. So yeah, very keen to hear your thoughts. We're going to dive into some kind of undervalued vets, some must buys. We're going to talk through 5 players. Let's try and help you win some dynasty titles and talk some guys that you can go and buy now that people aren't valuing correctly, that we think are going to outproduce their current valuations. So I'm going to kick things off, Hannah. I feel like I've been talking up this guy for about 6 months. I've done, I think, 2 separate pods on him individually. Let's throw him in again. Rhamondre Stevenson. He's currently the RB13 on DLF. He's my RB6. Are you a believer in Rhamondre Stevenson quite as much as I am?
As soon as I saw this, I was like, oh, Rich has done it again. Rhamondre, that's all I've heard for, like you say, months now. I do think he has a fantastic profile and I think he is awesome. I have slight reservations just because of the offense that he's on, being in New England. You know, I know that everybody talks about this. You know, they historically don't usually feature a single back. However, I do think his receiving profile and his receiving production could well still give him, a wide receiver 1 performance this season.
Yeah, I think that, to me, it's an overused and under-researched trope around people saying, well, Bill Belichick doesn't give RB1s, the bulk of work. If you look in his history, he's done it before. He's, Corey Dillon was a workhorse for 2 years for him, and he was absolutely an every down back. I think people forget that the Patriots of the last 10 years haven't really needed a true 3-down back because they've had the best pass catching back possibly ever, but definitely of the last 10 years in James White. James White was incredible in those 3rd down pass catching situations. So, of course, they took off somebody else off on the field and put James White on. Well, James White's not around anymore. Rhamondre Stevenson is the best receiving back that they've got in New England. He's the best goal line and short yardage back. He's the best 1st and 2nd down running back in New England. Are we really concerned about Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris? Like, they're nobodies. James Robinson, I've heard people talk up. This is a guy that basically got overlooked after the Jets traded for him, realised he couldn't do it, and then they went and were giving carries to an undrafted free agent over James Robinson. So, yeah, I think that Rhamondre Stevenson was running back 14 last year. He missed time through injuries. He was sat behind Damian Harris to begin the year. And then New England finally realised what they got and unleashed him. And I think that, to me, if I can get him at RB10 on keep trade cut prices, RB13 in DLF ADP, that's an absolute bargain for him. We've got my trade values up on the screen there. I'd happily pay a 1st and a 2nd for him. I don't think you have to pay that. I think probably a mid-1st is probably a bit of an overpay in terms of his market value. Are you thinking that there could be another back added through this offseason, or are you thinking that this is Rhamondre Stevenson's workload to lose as such?
I think if they were going to add someone, I think they would have done it already. Personally, I don't see them doing it. You know, they drafted 2 last season, didn't they? I think it's Rhamondre's to win, well, to lose, obviously, at this point. So I don't think they will. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, Dalvin Cook's obviously got released today, so I've probably dated that as we're recording it, but it's probably not going to be out for a few days. But I'd be shocked if Dalvin Cook went and signed in New England. I'm not sure that's where he'd want to play. I'm not sure they'd want him. So I don't see any, Leonard Fournette or Zeke Elliott or anyone like that coming up to New England. I think they're all going to be chasing rings and probably more money than the Patriots would want to pay. I know you made the point earlier about the offense. I think that's the underrated thing about this. Last year we had a defensive coordinator as the play caller and the offensive line coach. They've now got a competent offensive line coach. They've now got Bill O'Brien back as an OC. I think this offense as a whole is going to take a step forward. And I think that Rhamondre Stevenson, we know that he's going to get those high value touches. So I'm really excited about the price that I can pay to acquire him. If he's going 5th, 6th round of Superflex startups, I think that's a really comfortable price to go and acquire. And as I said, I'm happy to pay a first, but I don't think you have to. So we're going to dive across to our next player, Hannah. This is your selection, so I'm going to let you introduce our man, Derek Carr.
Yeah, so this is my selection, and after Rhamondre, I kind of feel like this is everyone's going to say, "Oh, this is really boring. Why would you pick Derek Carr? He's not quite as exciting as Rhamondre." But hear me out. I think we all kind of know who he is at this point. I think he is at this stage your prototypical QB2. Now, actually, on DFL, ADP, and Keep Trade Cut, he's ranked as QB 25. Last season, he actually finished as QB 17. And over the past 3 seasons, he's finished, prior to that, is QB 14, 14, and 17. So he's never been below QB 20. And even when last season, when there was clearly disharmony, between him and Josh McDaniels, he still managed to finish as a QB 17. Now, I just think people in Dynasty seem to kind of forget these players that, okay, they might not be your league winners, but they're going to give you steady production. And for Derek Carr, I personally think he's going to outperform what we have as his ADP, at this stage. People are going to say, oh, he's got no upside, so why do I want him on my team? But I would actually argue that on Superflex teams, he actually would work really good as a QB2 in multiple different roster builds. So I think, if you've got a high upside young QB like an Anthony Richardson, let's say, I think he would slot quite nicely in as your QB2 as kind of a steady, regular performer where you're going to have, points in that slot every week. And I also think he would suit a contending team well. So I think people kind of get quite caught up in Superflex leagues and like, I need 2 really, really amazing quarterbacks. Well, I actually think sometimes I would much prefer spending a little less capital on my QB2 position, but with, someone who's going to give me regular production, and then putting the rest of that into looking at skill position players where I feel potentially they have more sway and maybe potentially upside to either make me a contender or make me win the league, the QB2, I don't feel ultimately is the position that's going to make me win or lose my league, so I would rather pay QB3 prices for Derek Carr and have him performing as a QB2 than pay much more for someone else who's also a QB2. And incidentally, last season, the difference between Derek Carr and the QB12 was only 2 points per game. So if I'm paying more for whoever the QB12 is, but not getting that much more production, I'm actually just wasting a lot of my kind of capital in this player when I think you could have Derek Carr and you could use the rest on someone, who is more valuable in the skill position. I don't know what you think there. Rich, I'm also, sorry, before I'm not letting you talk, but I'm also interested in your thoughts in what he's going to be like with the Saints, because to me, I don't think that his production is going to dip in any way by going to the Saints, and I think potentially there's a chance it could improve,
Yeah, I love the pick. Look, I'm a staunch believer in old quarterbacks. I said time and time again that quarterback age is the most overvalued aspect of dynasty value, and I'm a true believer in that. You look at Derek Carr, we talked about him being valued as a QB3. That's a QB3. Yet this is a guy that we know is going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL for the next 4 years. How do I know that? you go look at his contract. There is no way that he can be moved until after the 2026 season without the team taking a massive dead cap hit. Well, how many quarterbacks in the NFL can you guarantee as a starter for the next 3-4 years? None of the rookies, most of those young, high upside players that you're thinking about. This time a year ago, people, including myself, were hyping up Zach Wilson as a potential boom bust play. Well, he's busted. We talk about Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. They're all going to be, the next superstar quarterbacks. Well, history shows that they've probably got about a 30 to 40% chance of being a star. So that's probably one, maybe two of those that are going to be fantasy relevant in 4 years' time. Well, I can guarantee that Derek Carr, he's not got the upside. Yeah, he's not that sexy guy that's going to go and win me a league. But you're not having to pay the prices for him to go and win you a league. At the cost to acquire, he just needs to be, as you said, that rotational QB2. I always say that I like to pair my QB2 with my QB3. If I'm going safe at QB2, I want a high upside guy at QB3. If I'm going high upside at QB2, I want a safe guy at QB3. Well, Derek Carr is that perfect safe option. Any startup this year that I've done where I've not gone 2 QBs early, Derek Carr is 100% a guy that I'm targeting as that safe QB2/QB3 that I can pair with the high upside guy, because I know week in, week out, I can put Derek Carr in my lineup and he's not going to lose me the week. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He had 7 top 12 weeks last year. He had another 3 weeks inside the top 16. He basically had 2 bad games last year. One was a win against the Texans, against the loss against the Saints, where they got absolutely destroyed. And one was the game against the Rams, which was an absolute tire fire with Baker Mayfield at quarterback. I honestly think that going from Las Vegas to New Orleans is going to be good for Derek Carr. Derek Carr, yes, is probably about a par in terms of receiving talent. You're going from Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, who were both injured for most of last year, to Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, Jahan Dotson. Derek Carr has got the arm talent to push the ball downfield, but he didn't have to do that in Las Vegas because Devontae Adams wins in those intermediate areas. Hunter Renfrow is certainly not going deep. Chris Olave is fantastic going deep. Rashid Shaheed is amazing going deep. There are guys in New Orleans that are going to allow Derek Carr to push the ball down the field. So I'm all in and all on board with this take, and I think it's fantastic, and I completely agree. We've got on the screen there what I would pay to go and acquire him. Those are my trade values. Would you pay that much to go and get him? Do you think you have to pay that much to go and get him right now?
No, I don't think you do at all. I think people are really down on him. Like you were just saying, how many QBs, are going to start for the next, 4 years in the league? Well, he is currently, in ADP and in keep trade cut rank lower than guys like Jared Goff and Russell Wilson. Both of those, we have no idea if they're going to be starters after this season. I don't get it at all. And I think buy the dip, really seriously buy the dip, because like you say, if he does get going on that New Orleans offense, I think there's a chance he could be a low-end QB1 here, and you've paid a QB3 price to pick him up. So I would pay that, but I don't think you need to, again. I really don't. I think you could definitely get away with much cheaper, because he's boring. People don't want them boring players on their team, and that's why people don't win.
Yeah, exactly that. I think if you're paying a 24 first, you're basically looking at, statistically, you're hoping for 2 seasons of top 24 production. That's about the value you're paying in a 24 first. Well, if you're paying that for Derek Carr, we're talking about basically 4 guaranteed years. I think something drastic would have to happen for him to not finish as a top 24 quarterback in 50% of those seasons. So to me, that says he's a great guy to go and buy, and I think it's a fantastic option. So we're going to go across the next guy. I feel like I talk about him constantly. I feel like he's become my one true love. Diontae Johnson, you can see there, he had a challenging year last year. Obviously didn't score a touchdown off the back of a wide receiver 8, I think, overall season in 2021. Do you think that we've seen the best of Diontae Johnson and he's being valued fairly, or do you think that the hate's gone too far and he's a screaming buy right now?
Yeah, I 100% think the hate's gone too far. I mean, I totally get it. You know, he did have a down season. I think Diontae Johnson's one of those players where people look basically at the stat sheet and say, oh, wide receiver 46, you know, and they don't, you know, the Steelers weren't particularly exciting last season, so I don't think many people went out of their way to watch them, you know. All they did was look at the stat sheet and go, oh, he's rubbish. You know, I don't want him on my team. But as you said, you know, previously, last season before, he was wide receiver 8, season before that, wide receiver 18. And as you mentioned before, the reason he was so low was because he scored 0 touchdowns. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone has heard this, you know, again and again, but, you know, regression is a thing, you know, and he is going to regress back to the mean or closer to it anyway. And his underlying measurables are still there. So last season, he was 6th in targets out of all wide receivers. He was 12th in red zone targets. He had 15. There were 3 other players that also had 15 red zone targets. A.J. Brown, who had 11 touchdowns off that, and then Chris Godwin and Russell Gage. All 3 of those players had 3 or more touchdowns. So, you know, if he has 15 red zone targets next season, you know, I would expect at least 3 touchdowns there. And as much as people don't seem to want to admit it anymore, he is still the wide receiver 1 on that team. People seem to have got fixated on George Pickens, and his ADP is higher, which I'm sorry, but I have no idea why that is the case. His target share was 26.1%, was Diontae Johnson's. Pickens wasn't even the second player on the team to have the next high target share. He was 3rd with 19.3%. Pat Freiermuth was actually 2nd. Johnson had 8.6 targets a game, Pickens only 4.9. You know, I think that people just kind of want to forget him because I don't think his play is exciting like Pickens is. Again, he's not that exciting player. Kenny Pickett, I think, is likely going to take a step forward this season. Obviously, he had his rookie year last season. He didn't come in until halfway through. There were certainly some challenges. They've tried to upgrade and bring reinforcements in for that O-line, which I think will also help. And Johnson is still contracted until 2025. So it's not like he's on a contract year or anything like that. We don't know what team he's going to be on. You know, he's still got a couple of years there, which I think he's going to give us reliable production. I honestly just think he's criminally undervalued, and he 100% is going to outperform his ADP for sure.
Yeah, it feels like there's a theme here of the last 2 guys we talked about in terms of safe, unsexy, reliable, but that's got so much value. We're talking about Diontae Johnson versus George Pickens, and I feel like this is the exact same argument I was having 2 years ago with Diontae Johnson versus Chase Claypool. People look at Diontae Johnson, he's like 6 foot, I think he's about 180, 185 pounds. He's not, you know, massive. He's not your prototypical X receiver, but the guy is a true X receiver because he's uncoverable. He's one of the best route runners in the league, without doubt. And it's like, okay, he might not be as sexy as George Pickens. He might not be able to go and grab those leaning one-handed catches down the sideline, but he gets open at will and can command 140, 150 targets with ease. Well, what do you want of your wide receiver other than a guy that can get open and catch balls? That's really exciting. I agree with you that Kenny Pickett's going to take a step forward, but I think Kenny Pickett already broke out. I think if you go back and watch the final 5 games of the season last year, compare them to the first 5 games that Kenny Pickett played, they are drastically different. Kenny Pickett made such huge improvements last year, but nobody was watching because the Steelers weren't in the playoff hunt and weren't that exciting team. Kenny Pickett's taken a step forward. I think that Kenny Pickett is going to be, you know, he's never going to be a superstar, but he's going to be in that solid, reliable Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr mold. go look at the wide receiver production that Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, players like Andy Dalton have had in their heyday. There's absolutely a world that Diontae Johnson could be a wide receiver 1. Yes, I said wide receiver 1 again next year. But you're not having to pay that. You're paying wide receiver 3 prices for a guy that's got wide receiver 1 upside. We're talking about probably going to see at least 120 targets, if not potentially 150. What's not to love? Like, I sometimes I just don't get it. I feel like sometimes I'm watching a different game. I'm watching a different sport, because to me, Diontae Johnson does everything I want over a wide receiver, other than being 6'4" and built like a Greek god. He gets open, he catches the ball, he scores me fantasy points. Yes, he had a down year, but so did everybody on the Steelers last year. The offensive line was terrible. The quarterback was a rookie. We all know that rookie quarterbacks don't produce wide receiver production for fantasy. But go look at second-year quarterbacks and how they do for wide receivers. They do fantastic. So let's all get on board Diontae Johnson. I love this call, Hannah. I am 100% all in.
Before we finish on him, go on.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree or not, but I sometimes feel like people in Dynasty, they're so busy chasing upside that they forget that you also need a floor, in your team.
100%.
And even though, like, as we're talking, he's not even necessarily a floor, because you could be buying for him as a wide receiver 3 now, and potentially he has the upside of being a wide receiver 1 next season, But
I think, Hannah, you have absolutely hit the nail on the head there, but I'm going to go a bit further and be slightly harsh. I don't think people understand what floor and ceiling is. I think it gets thrown around constantly, but people don't actually know what they mean when they say he's got a high ceiling, he's got a low floor. Diontae Johnson was a wide receiver 1 the season before last. How can that not have a high ceiling? When you're talking about the ceiling of a player and going, I'm chasing upside, I'm chasing for the moon. This guy was a wide receiver 1 12 months ago. That is upside. Okay, we can talk about guys looking like Calvin Johnson, and I feel like I'm bringing out all my old tropes on this show with you, Hannah, but I talk about my Calvin Johnson theory, where people hype up the big-bodied, fast outside receivers because they think that's what's the next Calvin Johnson. We're all chasing the next Calvin Johnson. Well, since Calvin Johnson retired, go look at who have been the wide receiver 1s in fantasy. Antonio Brown, Cooper Kupp, even Justin Jefferson. Like, they're not Greek gods. They're not built in a lab. Like, you don't just have to be 6'4", 230 pounds and ripped to be a superstar wide receiver in the NFL. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head. It's not a boring, safe play when you can get a guy that's got wide receiver 1 upside for wide receiver 3 prices. That's a really logical, high floor, high ceiling play. Like, the floor of Diontae Johnson. Diontae Johnson had a terrible year last year. He didn't score any touchdowns, and he was still a wide receiver 4. Yet you're only having to pay wide receiver 3 prices. He's not old. He's, you said that he's got 3 years left on his contract. He finishes unrestricted free agent in 2025. Well, he could potentially, there's an out after this year. I think that the Steelers are going to have to either restructure and extend him, or he could potentially be traded, or he could find himself in a new home. But I don't think Diontae Johnson's going anywhere for fantasy, and I think that the fact that you can get him at this value is absolutely wild.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Would you happily pay a 2024 first, which is where I've got his value, but I appreciate I'm higher than most?
I would. Again, I suspect you won't have to. This is the lowest his value has been for 2 years. I think you should go out and buy him. People won't, because he's not exciting, but you totally should be. I think people now want to say, I found this player before he broke out. I drafted this player as a rookie,
Yes.
and I found him. I knew he was going to be great. And I think that's a lot of what people are trying to do in Dynasty now, rather than actually, I want to build a winning roster.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's so great. And, let's just look back a couple of years, okay? Cooper Kupp had a wide receiver 5 finish. He then got, some changes around at quarterback. He was undervalued. He then broke out and became this superstar and has produced, arguably the greatest 2-year run at wide receiver we've ever seen. It was, I think it was 18 consecutive games over 15 PPR points. Now, I'm not saying Diontae Johnson is going to do that, but we've just seen Cooper Kupp break out mid-career after being a wide receiver 1. Why can't Diontae Johnson do that again? I think this offense is taking a step forward. I think Kenny Pickett's taking a step forward. I think Diontae Johnson's going to get a huge amount of targets. So, yeah, let's buy in. I'm happy. I'll be honest, I can't go and buy any more shares because I'm already at my 30% limit. And I'm a bit scared that if he gets injured, I'd be crippled. But we're going to dive across to another guy. Again, he's a guy that is criminally undervalued, criminally underrated because he is not sexy. I've got an article coming out this week about James Conner. Look, he's a plug-and-play, boring RB2. There is nobody else on this offense. We've got Keontae Ingram, who's a 6th-round pick last year. We've got Tyson Williams, who's an undrafted free agent that got released by the Ravens halfway through the year. Like, there's nobody on this offense. They're tanking, they're rebuilding. So, yeah, James Conner's probably going to get boring RB2 production, but I'm having to pay RB4 prices. Like, you can probably go and get him in a throw-in in a trade. I've got there that I'd pay a second. I, again, don't think you have to pay that. Are you scared that the end has already come for James Conner, or do you think that he's an undervalued player again?
No, totally agree with you, Rich. As you say, he is basically the only running back on this team. We've seen what he can do on this team. I think, sorry, I'm going to go back to this again, but I think people are scared to buy running backs like James Conner because they feel that they don't hold any value. So they don't want them on their roster because they can't sell them again. So instead of thinking, right, he's actually going to add value to my team by being a very valuable running back too, they say, oh, no, he's got no value. I don't want him, on my team because I can't sell him again. They don't look at what's it going to add to my team and my roster that means that I'm going to have a winning team. And I think people are just scared to do that. But no, I think he's a great buy.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to try and paint a picture of some graphs through voice, which I appreciate isn't the easiest thing. But I think if you look at you can do this for any player, but it works particularly well with running backs, okay? There are 2 things that make up a player's dynasty value. It is production and it is kind of trade value, should we call it, or kind of future resale value, okay? So when a rookie comes out, the production hasn't hit, but he's got quite high future resale value because you're expecting and hoping that player is going to appreciate in value once he starts producing. You then so their value kind of goes up. You then get to a player's peak, should we call it? It's normally 23 to 26 for a running back. That's the point at which they are producing, they are scoring fantasy points for your dynasty team, and they've got some future resale value. As running backs go on, they're still producing, but their future resale value disappears, and therefore their dynasty value drops quite considerably. And that's the point at which they become a screaming buy, because the dynasty community have said, this guy's no longer valued because he's got no future resale value. So his value drops below the point at which his production is. And you've got James Conner who's sitting there who, yeah, he's boring. Yeah, he's unsafe. Yeah, he's unsexy. But you can probably get him for, a second? Maybe you can get him even cheaper than that. Maybe you can go and pay 2/3. Now, if I said to you that James Conner is going to be an RB2 this year, nobody would be that surprised. But if I said to you, right, you can have this 2nd-round pick that's got a 20 to 30% chance of producing 1 RB2 season in their lifespan, most people are going to want the 2nd-round pick. And it's like, okay, you can have, behind door number 1, you can have a boat. But behind door number 2, you can have anything, but it might be a boat. Like, just take the boat. I think that people, I'm all for getting out on running backs at peak value, and you sell them when they're at that peak point of production and future resale value. I 100% agree. I'm team always be selling running backs, but I love buying these end of career running backs that you can throw away a cheap pick, knowing I'm burning this pick on fire. I'm never going to get any resale value out of this player, but this 1 year of production is worth more than the pick I'm paying. So we're going to go back to the wide receiver position. Another one of my true loves, another guy that I feel like I've been hyping up for the last 12 months, but Jahan Dotson. I'm basically calling Jahan Dotson discount Christian Watson this offseason. Okay. You go back and look at them last year, they were almost identical in terms of their production. They were both heavily reliant on the touchdown and the kind of the deep shot, shall we say. However, one of these players was a better prospect coming out. One of these players was a first-round pick last year and not a second-round pick. One of these players just lost a multiple-time MVP, future Hall of Fame quarterback for a question mark. The other lost a journeyman backup quarterback for another journeyman backup quarterback. I don't see how Jahan Dotson can be ranked and can be valued so drastically far behind Christian Watson. But if you just look on the screen now, you see the difference between where he's being valued on Keep Trade Cut and where he's being valued on DLF. So for me, I think he's a screaming undervalued buy candidate right now, because a lot of my research and a lot of my stuff is based on DLF ranks and DLF ADP. If you're playing on Keep Trade Cut, I think he's valued fairly. So are you, Hannah, the question is, are you a DLF believer in terms of their valuation, or a Keep Trade Cut kind of person?
I think I am more of a Keep Trade Cut. I think people are scared of Jahan Dotson because of the offence that he's on, and this kind of quarterback question, and also because of Terry McLaurin. I don't think they're taking into account his talent. And I suspect, I might be wrong here, but I suspect this is probably the cheapest you'll be able to buy him this off-season, because I think as soon as the season starts and people realise how talented he is, his value is going to skyrocket. So I do think people they're not looking at him, they're looking at, I think, external factors. And I think everyone has heard this again a million times, but talent always wins out, and ultimately his talent is going to show.
Yeah, I love it. I think that, don't get me wrong, I've never been the biggest Terry McLaurin fan from a Dynasty perspective. However, I think he is an elite NFL receiver. He's just always been overvalued in kind of Dynasty circles. But Terry McLaurin's 27, coming on 28. I think that Jahan Dotson should be valued ahead of him in Dynasty. I wouldn't be shocked if Jahan Dotson was out producing him as early as next season. And I think there's a chance that he could do it this year. I think that Jahan Dotson has got a high ceiling and has got that kind of second year breakout, under the radar name. Everybody's talking about Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London, but I think Jahan Dotson is absolutely worth considering in that kind of elite 6 wide receivers. We talked about it time and time again last year. Everyone was bigging up the top 5. To me, it was a top 6. And I really think that Jahan Dotson is undervalued. And if you can get him for a 24 first, I would absolutely rip your hand off right now. I would take him over in this year's draft. I'd have taken him over Zay Flowers. I'd have taken him over Quentin Johnson. You'd probably have to have a conversation. I'd have probably taken him behind Addison and Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he'd have been my 108 in this year's draft. That's what I'd be willing to pay for him. And I don't think you have to go and pay that. I think that you can get him for a random future first. And if you're a contender, this is a guy that brings some youth into your lineup, that's got that potential to break out and really add roster value. So I think whatever the situation, wherever your build is, wherever part of the recycle competing cycle you're at, he's a good player to go and acquire on the cheap.
Yeah, totally agree. And, this is the exact player, it's kind of like the opposite of the players that I discussed, which kind of we know what they are, we kind of know what we're getting with them. Like Dotson really is, people are always, shooting for upside, as we've talked halfway through. He is that guy. Like, I'm just surprised that people don't seem to want to buy him when they want to buy all of these other potential upside, players. I just I don't get it.
But I think you can see on screen there, as we said earlier, the difference between keep, trade, cut value and DLF. I think that just shows the importance of know who you're playing with, know what resources they use, because if somebody's using keep, trade, cut rather than DLF, chances are you're probably not going to be able to go and buy Jahan Dotson. But if you're playing in a league where people are relying on DLF resources, you can probably go and acquire Jahan Dotson on the cheap and feel very happy about it. But that concludes the show, Hannah. Thank you ever so much for coming on. It's been an absolute delight to chat these things through with you. Remind the people where can they find you? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Han Rowland. I am the co-host of Wildcard Rewind, which is at Wildcard Rewind on Twitter. And also you can see me on a Tuesday evening on the 5 Yard Dynasty show, trying to fill some very big boots that vacated it earlier this year. But you can see me and Dan every Tuesday night on the 5 Yard Dynasty show.
Beautiful. Well, thank you ever so much. It's been an absolute delight. By all means, go and follow Hannah's work. It is fantastic. If you're here, make sure you hit that like, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're going to be back very soon with some must-sell candidates with another fantastic guest. We'll see you again soon.